The storm had been building since late afternoon, rolling in from the Atlantic as Laura and Andrew Bennett left his parents' house in Cape Cod. By the time they merged onto Route 6, the sky was a low, churning gray, and the first sheets of rain swept across the windshield with a force that made Laura brace herself. Andrew gripped the steering wheel as if it had wronged him personally, jaw locked, shoulders stiff, a quiet fury rolling off him in waves. He hadn't spoken since they left the driveway, not a word during the silence-filled walk to the car, not a word as he slammed the door hard enough to make the frame shake. Laura had seen this version of him many times over the last 3 years, the version where something as small as an awkward comment or a sideways look from his mother detonated inside him and somehow became her fault. "Andrew," she said softly, hoping to break the tension before it spiraled, "can we just talk about what happened? I didn't mean to." "You never mean to," he snapped, eyes locked on the road. "That's your problem, Laura. You never mean anything, yet you always manage to embarrass me." The words hit her like cold water. She folded her hands tightly in her lap. "I was only trying to help your dad with—" "He didn't need help," Andrew cut in, voice rising. "He needed you to sit there and not sound like you just crawled out of some middle-class charity event." Laura swallowed. She had heard variations of this more times than she could count. Her background, her accent, her clothes, her lack of polish, as Andrew's mother once put it. And always, it echoed later through Andrew, sharper, meaner, weaponized. Outside, the rain thickened into a relentless torrent, hammering the car roof, streaking across the glass. The wipers thrashed back and forth, barely keeping pace. Visibility shrank to a narrow tunnel of distorted light ahead. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she wasn't sure what she was apologizing for. Andrew scoffed. "You're sorry? You humiliated me, Laura. Humiliated. God, every time we go there, it's the same thing. You can't hold a conversation with anyone. You can't dress appropriately. You can't even sit properly at a table. My mother tries to tolerate you, but you make it impossible." Her chest ached. She stared out at the rain-blurred guardrail, the trees bending violently in the wind. 3 years of this, of shrinking herself, apologizing for breathing too loudly, for choosing the wrong earrings, for speaking at the wrong moment. 3 years of watching Andrew transform from the charming man she'd once trusted into someone who seemed to feed off her fear. "Andrew, please," she tried again, voice trembling. "It wasn't that serious." "That's serious?" He let out a sharp laugh. "You corrected my father about a contractor detail. You, of all people, corrected him. You think you know more than my family?" "I wasn't correcting him," she said quickly. "I just mentioned—" "That's it!" Andrew shouted. "I'm done listening to you justify everything. You don't belong with people like them, Laura. You never have." A flash of lightning ripped across the sky, illuminating the angry set of his mouth, the tightness in his eyes. The storm roared around them, rain slamming the hood like hammer blows. Suddenly, Andrew jerked the wheel and pulled onto the shoulder, tires skidding slightly in the wet gravel. The car lurched to a stop. Laura instinctively reached for the dashboard. "Get out," he said. She blinked, stunned. "What?" "Andrew, get out." His voice cracked like a whip. "You ruined the night. I'm not driving another mile with you." The rain crashed against the windows, loud enough to swallow her breath. "You're not serious," she said, voice fragile and small. "I'm done with this conversation," Andrew growled. "Get out of the car, Laura." When she didn't move fast enough, he leaned across her, yanked the door handle, and shoved the door open. Freezing air and the violent sound of the storm blasted inside. Her heart pounded. She stepped out because resisting would only make it worse. The door slammed behind her, and then the red taillights shot forward, disappearing into the rain. For a moment, Laura stood motionless, the cold slicing through her soaked clothes, her hair plastered to her face. The storm swallowed the sound of the engine, swallowed everything except her own breathing, shallow, panicked, uneven. She wrapped her arms around herself and began walking along the shoulder, rain pouring down in sheets, each step heavier than the last. New England's storm raged around her, wind howling, water pooling beneath her feet. Alone, terrified, and utterly abandoned. Rain hammered against Laura with a force that felt almost personal, like the sky itself had turned against her. Within seconds, her sweater clung to her skin like wet paper, the cold cutting straight into the bone. She wrapped her arms tight across her chest and forced her legs to move, pushing forward along the narrow shoulder of Route 6 as the storm raged on. Her hands shook uncontrollably. At first, she thought it was fear, but the trembling deepened until it spread through her whole body. A creeping numbness crawled across her fingers, dulling sensation until she could barely feel them. She tried rubbing them against her jeans, but the motion did nothing. The cold was too sharp, too immediate. Her thoughts swirled as erratically as the wind. She felt disoriented, like her mind was struggling to keep pace with what had just happened. Andrew had left her. Actually left her. He had looked her in the eyes and ordered her out of the car, not in a moment of confusion, not in a meltdown he'd regret minutes later. This was something else, something deeper, something she suddenly realized had been building for years. A pair of headlights cut through the rain behind her. For a moment, hope flared in her chest, bright and desperate. She raised one numb hand, waving it weakly. The vehicle blew past her, sending a spray of cold water across her legs. She stumbled back, coughing from the shock. The lights faded quickly into the distance, swallowed by the storm. Another car approached. She waved again, higher this time, forcing her arm through the wind. Nothing. The car whizzed by, too fast for the conditions, too distant to notice a soaked woman on the shoulder. She blinked rain out of her eyes, trying to focus. Darkness pressed against the edges of her vision, creeping inward like a tightening tunnel. She tried to steady her breathing. It only made her more aware of how cold she was. "I can't believe he did that," she whispered to the wind. Though her voice was swallowed instantly by the storm, he actually did it. A wave of shame washed over her, hot and sudden despite the freezing air. Not shame for herself, but shame that she had allowed her life to become this small, this fragile. 3 years of enduring the gradual tightening of Andrew's control, 3 years of absorbing his criticism, his mood swings, his cruel remarks masked as truth. A flash of memory hit her. A moment from months ago. Andrew standing in their kitchen, accusing her of not understanding him, not supporting him. She had apologized then, too, just as she had hours earlier, and the day before, and the week before that. Maybe he really did hate her. Maybe he had been hating her for a long time, and this was simply the first time he stopped pretending otherwise. Another gust of wind slammed against her, pushing her sideways. Her foot slipped on the wet gravel, and she barely caught herself before hitting the ground. The jolt rattled through her, sharp and painful. Her shoes squished with each step, heavy with water. Her hair, plastered against her cheeks, made it difficult to see. "Just keep walking," she whispered, forcing the words out between shivering breaths. "Just keep walking." The phrase became a rhythm, something to hold on to as her body edged closer to collapse. Her vision blurred again, and she swayed dangerously close to the roadway. A car horn blared as a vehicle swerved, tires hissing through puddles. She stumbled backward, heart pounding wildly. That near miss stole whatever strength she had left. She sank to her knees for a moment, the cold pavement biting into her skin. Her breath came in ragged bursts, each one harder to control. Rain poured down her neck, down her sleeves, down her spine. The world tilted, pitching sideways. She forced herself upright again, one step, then another. The storm roared louder, drowning out everything but the sound of her own uneven breathing. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore. Her toes felt distant, unresponsive. Her thoughts drifted, foggy, slipping in and out of clarity. Just as she felt herself drifting toward the edge of the roadway again, Just as her foot crossed an inch too far into the traffic lane, a pair of headlights appeared behind her, bright and steady, much slower this time, much closer to the shoulder. A large black SUV eased to a stop beside her, engine humming low. The passenger window rolled down. "Miss, are you all right?" A calm, steady voice called out. A man's voice, older, grounded. Laura turned toward the sound, blinking rain from her lashes, and saw the silhouette of an elderly gentleman leaning toward her through the open window, his expression lined with genuine concern. The storm raged on, but for the first time that night, she wasn't alone. The window of the SUV stayed open just long enough for the older man to lean closer, rain blowing sideways across the glass. Even in the dim light, Laura could see the concern etched onto his face, lined, weathered, but gentle in a way that made her chest tighten with unexpected relief. "Please get in," he urged, his voice steady but firm. "You're freezing. You shouldn't be out here another minute." Laura hesitated, not because she feared him. There was nothing threatening about the man, but because her brain felt slow, foggy, barely able to process what was happening. The cold had dulled her reactions. She stood there shivering until he spoke again, more insistently. "Come on now. Hypothermia sneaks up on people. Inside, quickly." That word, hypothermia, cut through the fog. She opened the passenger door with trembling fingers and climbed inside. Warm air washed over her immediately, blasting from the vents. She let out an involuntary breath, the warmth hitting her skin like a shock. The man reached behind his seat and pulled out a thick wool blanket. "Here," he said, draping it around her shoulders with careful, respectful movements. "Wrap this tight." Laura obeyed, her teeth chattering as she clutched the blanket close. Her soaked clothes made her shiver even harder, but the heat from the vents began to soften the frozen ache in her limbs. "I'm Victor Harrington," he said once she'd settled, as if offering something steady for her to hold on to. "I live in Boston. I spotted you from the highway. You looked like you were about to collapse." His name rang faintly familiar. She realized then she'd probably seen it on construction signs or business articles, though her mind was too sluggish to place it clearly. I'm Laura," she managed, her voice hoarse. "Laura Bennett." Victor nodded with a gentleness that steadied her. "Laura, good. You're safe now." She exhaled shakily, the adrenaline that had kept her upright beginning to ebb. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound, the soft hum of the heater and the relentless drumming of rain on the roof. Then Victor glanced at her again, carefully, respectfully. "Do you mind if I ask what you were doing out there on a night like this?" Her throat tightened. She lowered her gaze to her hands, pale and stiff under the blanket. Shame hit her again, raw, unexpected. She didn't want to say the words aloud, but she was too exhausted to invent anything else. "My husband," she whispered. We were arguing. He pulled over and told me to get out." Victor's eyes darkened, not with shock, but with something quieter and heavier, a kind of disappointment that had nothing to do with her. "He left you alone on Route 6? He asked slowly. She nodded. "In this weather?" Another nod. Her eyes burned, but she blinked hard, refusing to break down in front of a stranger. Victor turned back to the windshield, his jaw tightening. For a man who'd spoken so calmly until now, the shift in his expression was striking. It wasn't anger. It was a deep, grounded disapproval, as if what Andrew had done violated something fundamental in him. "No one deserves that," he said softly, almost as if to himself. "No one." Laura clutched the blanket tighter. Victor guided the SUV back onto the road, driving slowly and carefully through the sheets of rain. The warmth inside the vehicle slowly revived her fingers, bringing back pins of sensation that stung more than comforted, but at least she could feel again. Halfway toward Boston, his phone buzzed through the car's speaker system. He pressed a button on the steering wheel. Victor, it's Harold. A man's voice filled the car. Are you close? The partners are already at the restaurant. Victor sighed quietly. Harold, I'm en route, but Sophie won't be joining. She came down with something. Fever. She's resting. That's unfortunate, Harold replied. You know how these investors are. They like seeing family around. It gives them a sense of continuity. Victor shot a glance at Laura, thoughtful. I'll handle it, he said, ending the call. For a long stretch, he said nothing. Laura could almost hear him thinking, weighing something carefully. She shifted uneasily, unsure what to expect. Finally, Victor cleared his throat. His voice was gentle, almost hesitant. Laura, he said, I'm going to ask you something unusual, and I want you to know you're free to say no. She turned toward him, uncertain. I need someone with me tonight, he continued softly. Just to sit at that table, smile politely, make small talk. My granddaughter usually accompanies me, but she can't tonight. He paused, making sure she wasn't overwhelmed. And if you're willing, he said, I'd be grateful. Victor kept his eyes on the road for a moment, giving Laura time to breathe, to settle, to feel the warmth of the blanket spreading slowly through her shoulders. The storm still pounded the SUV, but inside the cabin the world felt quieter, safer, held steady by the calm presence of the man driving. He finally spoke, his tone measured. The dinner tonight. It isn't just a social formality. It's the final stage of a long-term partnership I've been building for nearly a year. Construction, development, long-range planning. These people value consistency and legacy. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Bringing a family member signals stability, a generational bond. Laura listened silently, unsure where this was going, but grateful for the distraction from the cold that still clung to her bones. They're old-fashioned, Victor continued. They like to see the people they invest with anchored by family. It reassures them they're not placing millions into the hands of someone who might disappear next season. He exhaled. Without my granddaughter, I lose part of that rapport. Laura's gaze dropped to her hands beneath the blanket. She didn't know much about business dinners, but the weight in his voice was clear. This meeting mattered, a lot. Victor continued softly, but I don't want you to feel obligated. You've already had a terrible night. You don't owe me anything. He glanced at her then, quick, respectful, not probing. So I'll give you a choice. Laura's breathing stilled. I can drive you home right now, he said gently. Straight to your door. You don't have to explain a thing, or... He hesitated for the first time she'd seen since he pulled over to help her. Or you could accompany me this evening, just to sit beside me and smile politely. I'll introduce you as my granddaughter. Nothing more complicated than that. She blinked, stunned. Me? I don't think I can... I know it's unusual, Victor said. And I understand if you feel uncomfortable, but I promise you it's perfectly safe. You won't have to speak unless you want to. And afterward... His voice softened. Afterward. I'll make sure you don't go back to a dangerous situation. I can help you find a place to stay, connect you with a lawyer who specializes in family matters, make sure you have support. Her heartbeat quickened, not from fear, but from the overwhelming contrast between this stranger's kindness and the cold brutality Andrew had shown her tonight. No one should be abandoned in a storm, Victor murmured, almost under his breath. Not ever. Laura stared ahead at the streaks of rain sliding down the windshield. Go home? To a man who left her on the side of the highway? To the silence, the accusations, the tightening emotional noose she'd lived under for years. The thought made her stomach twist. But accompanying Victor, pretending to be someone she wasn't. She didn't trust her voice, her posture, anything about herself at the moment. She felt fragile, disoriented, shivering from cold and shock. And yet, Victor didn't pressure her. He didn't coax or manipulate. He simply waited, offering warmth in a storm that had stripped her down to nothing. Laura swallowed hard. Would I have to talk much? No, Victor assured her. Just be present. Be yourself quietly. That's all they expect of my granddaughter anyway. Why me? She whispered. Because you were there, he said simply. Because you needed a safe place to go. And because sometimes people cross paths for reasons they don't see until later. Another mile rolled by in silence. Rain drummed against the roof. The heater hummed softly. Finally, Laura let out a shaky breath. Okay, she said. I'll go with you. Victor nodded once, relieved but still gentle. Thank you, Laura. I won't let anything happen to you tonight. He reached for the turn signal and guided the SUV onto the ramp leading toward Boston's Seaport District, the lights of the city glowing faintly through the storm. You're safe now, he said quietly. I promise. The rain eased into a steady drizzle by the time Victor pulled into the circular driveway of an upscale restaurant in Boston's Seaport District, a glass and steel landmark overlooking the harbor where the valet attendants stood beneath heated awnings and the interior glowed with soft amber light. Laura stared out the passenger window, still clutching the blanket, feeling strangely suspended between two worlds, the one she had been abandoned in and the one she was walking into now. Victor stepped out first and spoke briefly to the valet, then opened her door himself. Come on, he said gently. Let's get you inside and warmed up. We'll ask for a private room. The staff seemed to know him. The maitre d' straightened, immediately attentive, and Victor quietly requested a private dining suite. While arrangements were made, he turned back to Laura. There's something in the SUV that might help you feel more comfortable, he murmured. My granddaughter keeps a small garment bag in the back. She had planned to wear something tonight before she got sick. Laura hesitated. Borrowing clothing felt intimate, intrusive, but Victor's expression was reassuring, almost paternal. Moments later, she found herself inside the SUV again, opening a small, neatly organized garment bag. Inside was a simple but elegant dress in muted navy, soft fabric, modest neckline, the kind of outfit that radiated understated refinement. She changed in the back seat as quickly as her trembling hands allowed, smoothing the fabric and trying to steady her breathing. When she returned, Victor smiled warmly. You look perfect. Come, let's walk through the basics. They stood beneath the overhang by the side entrance as he reviewed a few lines with her. Your name is Claire Harrington. You're studying environmental science at Tufts. You're polite, warm, and mostly quiet. Offer a smile, shake hands gently, and let me lead the conversation. Laura practiced once, then again, her voice steadying with each repetition. She had never played a part before, but tonight, somehow, the role felt like a lifeline, something to hold on to after nearly losing her footing on the highway. The maitre d' returned and guided them down a quiet hallway to a private dining room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. Victor opened the door for her. Laura stepped inside, and her breath instantly caught. Sitting at the far end of the table, leaning back in a leather chair half-turned toward two sharply dressed men, was Andrew Bennett, her husband, her abuser. The man who had left her hours ago on the side of Route 6 in a storm. He was mid-sentence, gesturing with casual confidence, until his eyes flicked up toward the door. The instant he saw her, this version of her, his entire body jolted. His face drained of color so completely, it was as if someone had pulled the world out from under him. Laura felt the room tilt. She gripped the edge of the chair nearest her to steady herself, but forced her expression into something neutral, almost serene. The dress, the warm lighting, her hair now brushed back behind her shoulders. She looked nothing like the soaked, shaking woman Andrew had abandoned on the highway. Not desperate, not powerless, not broken, alive, warm, confident, not walking alone through the storm. Andrew stared, wide-eyed, throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. He looked as if he were staring at a ghost who had somehow climbed out of the rain and found a seat at a table he believed belonged only to men like him. Victor, noticing the shift in the room, stepped forward with composed authority. "Gentlemen," he said smoothly, "thank you for your patience. This is my granddaughter, Claire. She'll be joining us this evening." The two business associates stood politely to greet her. Laura nodded. Offering a small, practiced smile, the lines she'd rehearsed slipping into place as if they were her own. "It's wonderful to meet you both." Her voice didn't waver. Andrew blinked rapidly, unable to look away from her. One of the associates clapped him lightly on the shoulder. "Andrew, you mentioned you've worked with Victor before, right? Small world." Andrew didn't answer. He couldn't. His hand tightened around the stem of his water glass until his knuckles whitened. Laura moved gracefully to the seat beside Victor, across from Andrew, her movements calm, measured. She felt her pulse racing beneath her skin, but held her posture with quiet dignity. For the first time in 3 years, the power dynamic had shifted, and Andrew knew it. He knew it the moment she walked through that door, dry, warm, and no longer a woman he could leave in the dark. The servers slipped quietly in and out of the private room, bringing water, menus, soft candlelight. Victor waited until everyone had settled before offering a warm, seemingly effortless introduction. "Before we begin," he said with a genial smile, "I'd like you to meet my granddaughter. Well, technically, my granddaughter Sophie's cousin, but she's family all the same." He gestured toward Laura. The two investors nodded politely. One of them, a silver-haired man in a tailored navy suit, said, "Lovely to meet you, dear." Laura returned the greeting with a small, poised nod, exactly as Victor had coached her. Across the table, Andrew stared at her with an expression that flickered between panic and warning. His eyes widened slightly, subtle motions meant to signal her. "Don't say anything, don't you dare say anything." A plea wrapped in threat. Laura lowered her gaze to her menu, deliberately avoiding his eyes. She wasn't here to confront him. She wasn't here to speak for or against him. Tonight, her role was simple: sit, smile, breathe. But the tension in Andrew's shoulders told her he feared far more than that. The conversation eased into business logistics, project timelines, zoning requirements, cost projections for upcoming redevelopment. Victor spoke with quiet authority, his decades in the industry evident in every measured sentence. When the investors complimented him on his transparency and reliability, he simply nodded, deflecting praise with modesty. Meanwhile, Andrew tried to insert himself into the conversation at every opportunity. "I've always believed in strong values," he began, leaning back in an attempt to appear relaxed. "Integrity, family, respect. Those are the principles I live by." Laura felt her chest tighten. Respect, integrity, family. The words slid from his mouth as if they actually belonged to him, as if he hadn't left her freezing on the side of Route 6 just hours ago. She steadied her breathing, fingers brushing the linen napkin on her lap. Andrew continued, layering each lie with theatrical sincerity. "And of course, I'm devoted to my wife. She's my world. I always put her first." A small, polite smile formed on Laura's lips. Barely there, but enough to hide the quake beneath her ribs. A few hours ago, he had screamed at her for embarrassing him, for ruining the night, for never being enough. The storm had pounded on the car roof while he tore her down piece by piece. But here, in front of Victor's potential partners, he played the role of the perfect tender husband. The hypocrisy was staggering. "So many men in this city forget their roots," Andrew added with an easy shrug. "But not me. I believe in treating women with respect. Comes from the way I was raised." One of the investors smiled approvingly. "Good to hear. Too many young men forget that character matters. We've always trusted Victor because he represents stability, honor, commitment." Victor nodded slightly, accepting the compliment but redirecting humbly. I've had good people around me, he said. Family helps keep me grounded. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. Victor spoke with authenticity, his integrity woven through decades of consistent behavior. Andrew tried to mimic that tone, but every word seemed forced, every gesture slightly out of sync. Laura could see the investors noticing the difference, even if politely. Their eyes tracked Victor with confidence. They looked at Andrew with mild tolerance. Dinner continued. Victor discussed community impact and long-term planning. He occasionally glanced at Laura with quiet reassurance. She held her posture, calm and controlled, even as Andrew's lies swirled around her like smoke. When the appetizers arrived, one of the investors chuckled fondly. "You're a lucky man, Victor. A strong business reputation and a strong family. It's rare to see both." Victor acknowledged the comment with a modest smile. Andrew, desperate to reclaim footing, jumped in. "Yes, strong families are everything," he said quickly. "My wife and I, we're unshakable." Laura's pulse hammered at the word. Unshakable. Hours ago, he had driven off and left her praying a passing car wouldn't hit her. He had left her to hypothermia, to fear, but she kept her expression serene, eyes lowering gently to her plate. Her silence was louder than any accusation. And for the first time since the night began, Andrew looked genuinely afraid that the truth, his truth, was no longer entirely in his control. The entrees had just arrived when one of the investors, Harold, the older man with the silver hair and precise, accountant-like posture, turned casually to Andrew with the kind of polite curiosity that held no warning. "So, Andrew," he asked lightly, "you've spoken so highly of your family values tonight. Where is your wife this evening? Didn't you say you two had plans?" The question drifted across the table like a match landing in dry grass. Andrew stiffened. His smile twitched. "She's home resting," he replied quickly, lifting his glass to hide the wobble in his voice. "Long week. She wasn't feeling well. I insisted she stay in." Victor's eyes lifted. Just a small movement, but enough. Laura felt her breath lodge in her throat. She kept her gaze lowered, pretending to adjust her napkin, though she sensed Victor's attention sharpen in real time, like a man finally confirming a suspicion he had been trying not to name. The investors nodded politely, accepting the lie without thought. But Victor didn't move on. He folded his hands neatly on the table, posture straight, voice steady. The gentle warmth he had maintained all evening cooled a degree. Still civil, still composed, but different. Intentional. "You know," Victor said as if commenting on the weather, "on my way here tonight, something unusual happened." The room quieted. Even the faint hum of conversation from the hallway seemed to retreat. "I saw a woman on Route 6, he continued, "walking alone, in the rain, in near freezing temperatures." Andrew's knife clattered softly against his plate. Victor's tone remained composed, almost reflective. "She was soaked through. Her shoes were ruined. She could barely feel her hands." The investors exchanged glances, surprised. Laura felt her pulse pounding at her temples. Victor did not look at Andrew yet. His gaze remained on the investors, as though recounting a story to colleagues about something unfortunate he'd witnessed. Cars were flying by her at 50, 60 miles an hour. She was shaking, disoriented, on the verge of hypothermia. "Good God," Harold murmured. "That's terrible." "Yes," Victor agreed quietly. "Terrible and preventable." He let that word seep into the air. "She told me she hadn't been walking by choice." Andrew swallowed, throat visibly tight. "She told me," Victor said, "that her husband pulled over during an argument, in the storm, yelled at her, and drove away." Silence. Real silence. The kind that changes everything. The second investor, Miles, younger, sharp-eyed, leaned forward slowly. "Someone left their wife on a highway in those conditions?" Victor finally turned, not to Laura, not to the investors. but directly across the table to the man shrinking into his chair. "That woman," Victor said, each word calm and precise, "was Laura, your wife." Andrew's face collapsed. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Laura felt the warmth of the room vanish. Her breath shook, but she kept her posture fixed, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Victor, this is a misunderstanding," Andrew stammered. She exaggerates things. She gets emotional. Victor lifted a hand, not abrupt, just enough to silence the flailing excuses. "I picked her up myself," he said. "She was freezing, barely able to speak. She could have been killed." Harold turned to Laura slowly, his voice gentle. "Is that true?" For the first time that night, she allowed herself to speak. Her voice was soft, controlled, but every syllable carried the weight of 3 years of swallowed pain. "Yes," she said. "He screamed at me, told me I ruined the night, told me to get out of the car. Then he drove away." Andrew lurched forward. "Laura, stop. This is not what—" She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Harold, on Miles, on Victor, anywhere but the man whose rage she had spent years surviving. "He didn't even check if I was safe," she continued, voice trembling but clear. "He just left." "Laura!" Andrew snapped, more desperate than angry now. "You're making me look—" Miles cut him off sharply. "We don't need her to make you look anything. We're listening to facts." Andrew's face flushed deep red. Panic overtook every feature. "She's unstable," he blurted. "She twists things. She always has. She needs help." Victor's voice sliced through the noise, low and unwavering. "She needed help tonight, and you left her to die." The words landed like a stone thrown into still water. Harold leaned back, appalled. This is the man who said he believes in respect? Miles shook his head slowly. "This is not someone I would ever trust in business." Andrew's world, built on charm and performance, cracked right there at the table, under the weight of his own lies. And for the first time, Laura felt something unfamiliar rise quietly in her chest. Not fear, not shame, but the beginning of freedom. For a long moment, no one at the table spoke. The silence that followed Victor's final sentence wasn't the kind that lingered politely. It was the kind that closed doors, ended relationships, and left reputations in ruins. Harold set his napkin down with deliberate care. "Victor," he said quietly, "I appreciate your honesty, and I'm grateful you intervened to help this young woman." His eyes shifted to Andrew, sharp and unforgiving. "But I won't conduct business with someone capable of that level of cruelty." Miles nodded. "If you can abandon your wife on a highway in a storm, what would you do to your partners when things get difficult?" He pushed his chair back. "We can't align ourselves with instability or violence." Andrew's jaw fell open. "Gentlemen, please, this is not what it looks like. She's twisting—" Harold held up a hand. "Enough." Andrew froze mid-sentence. "We've seen enough," Miles added. "Character matters. Integrity matters. You don't have either." With that, both investors rose from the table, gathering their coats, their briefcases, their phones. They didn't offer Andrew a final handshake. They didn't offer a diplomatic exit. They simply walked out, the door closing behind them with a soft but irreversible click. The partnership, the long-term deal Andrew had bragged about securing, the project he'd tied so much ambition to, vanished in that single moment. Andrew's face twisted into something wild and raw. He turned on Laura with a ferocity that made the air feel colder. "This is your fault," he spat, voice cracking. "You humiliated me. You destroyed everything. You think this makes you look good? You think anyone will believe your little sob story? You cost me my future." Laura flinched, but Victor was already standing. He moved with controlled precision, positioning himself between them like a stone wall. "Sit down, Andrew," he said sternly. "Right now." Stay out of this, Andrew snapped. This has nothing to do with you. Victor didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. It has everything to do with me. You left her in danger, you created this. You're responsible for what happened tonight. Andrew took a step forward, but Victor didn't move an inch. He stood solid, unwavering, his presence alone enough to stop Andrew in his tracks. Laura, Victor said without looking away from Andrew, you're safe. He won't lay a finger on you. Those words seemed to ignite something in Andrew. Pride? Rage? The collapse of the persona he'd performed for years? Whatever it was, it tore through him violently. You think she's innocent? Andrew barked. She's manipulative. She wants attention. Enough, Victor repeated. For the first time in the night, Andrew's voice cracked with something like desperation. She ruined everything. No, Victor said calmly. You ruined everything the moment you walked away from your wife in a storm. Andrew's breath came fast now, shallow and uneven. The facade was gone. The charm, the poise, the expensive suit, the curated confidence. All that remained was a man exposed, cornered by his own truth. Realizing the night was beyond saving, he snatched his coat from the back of his chair. You'll regret this, he hissed, to Victor, to Laura, to the empty room. Both of you. But the words held no power anymore. He stormed toward the exit, shoving the door so hard it rebounded off the frame. His footsteps echoed down the corridor. Fading, frantic, humiliated. A man walking away just as he had walked away on the highway. Only this time he was the one left in the storm. Victor waited until the echoes died out before turning to Laura. She looked small, shaken, but present, held together by sheer will. Come, Victor said gently. Let's get you out of here. He placed a steadying hand at her back and guided her toward a side hallway. The staff, noticing the tension, discreetly opened an alternate exit, one that led toward the dimly lit rear of the restaurant, away from the main parking lot. They stepped into the cool night air, the harbor's salt breeze sweeping across them. Victor stayed close, but not controlling, giving her space, giving her safety. Inside, the remnants of the ruined deal still hung in the air. Outside, Laura took her first steady breath in hours. Andrew was gone. And the night, brutal as it had been, was finally shifting. Victor drove quietly through Boston, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. Laura sat wrapped in the blanket, staring out the window, the adrenaline slowly draining from her body. The demands of the night, the storm, the confrontation, the humiliation she endured for years had built a pressure inside her that now trembled on the edge of collapse. They crossed the Charles River and entered Back Bay, where elegant brownstones lined the quiet streets. Victor turned into a private driveway behind a restored Victorian building. "This is one of my properties," he said gently. "My granddaughter stays here sometimes when she's in the city. It's vacant this week." He unlocked a side entrance and guided her up a short staircase. When he opened the apartment door, warm air greeted them immediately. The space was soft and calm, muted colors, warm lamps, thick rugs, and a faint lavender scent coming from a diffuser on the kitchen counter. In the living room, a plush sofa faced a large window overlooking Marlborough Street. A stack of books sat on the coffee table, and a folded quilt rested on the back of a rocking chair. It was the kind of space built for safety, and Laura hadn't felt safe in a very long time. "You can stay here as long as you need," Victor told her. "No pressure, no expectations." Her throat tightened. "I don't want to impose—" "You're not." His voice was steady. "You needed shelter tonight. That's all that matters." He disappeared briefly and returned with a small suitcase, fresh clothes, toiletries, a soft robe. Then he placed a bag of groceries on the counter: soup, bread, fruit, tea, honey. He'd thought through everything she might need before she even asked. "And here," he added, handing her a small folder, "is a list of attorneys, family law, domestic cases, protective orders. These are people I trust. Laura stared at the folder, at his hands, at the quiet apartment that felt like another world, a world where storms didn't swallow you, where someone didn't scream at you for existing. The weight of it all broke her. Without warning, tears surged forth, violent, uncontrollable years of swallowed grief crashing at once. She sank onto the couch, covering her face, sobs shaking her shoulders. Victor didn't rush to soothe her. He simply sat in the armchair across from her, hands folded, presence calm and grounded. When she could finally breathe again, he said softly, "Laura, you're not alone anymore. Not tonight. Not going forward." Something inside her, something small, something battered, finally believed it. The following weeks moved slowly, but for the first time in years. The slow pace felt healing rather than suffocating. Victor offered her a temporary position at Harrington Construction Group, starting at the front desk, answering phones, helping with schedules, organizing files. She expected to feel awkward, out of place, but the staff was warm, respectful, and protective of her in a way she didn't know how to accept at first. She learned the rhythm of the company, found comfort in the routine, and realized how much she had forgotten about feeling capable. Victor's granddaughter, Sophie, stopped by the office a week later. She was bright, warm, close to Laura's age, and instantly hugged her as if embracing an old friend. "Granddad told me everything," she said gently. "I'm so glad you're safe." Sophie invited her for coffee one morning, took her shopping for clothes she truly liked, and insisted she join Sunday dinners with the family. It wasn't pity, it was inclusion, acceptance, a bridge back into human connection. Laura also began therapy with a trauma specialist Victor had recommended. The first few sessions were hard, raw memories, trembling hands, a voice she hardly recognized as her own. But slowly she found the words for what she had survived. Slowly the shame she carried began to loosen its hold. And when she finally called her mother, after months of distance fueled by Andrew's control, her mother cried with relief. "Sweetheart, come home for dinner," she pleaded. "Come any time. You don't have to explain. Just come." Laura didn't realize how much she had missed her until she heard her mother's voice. Little by little, Laura's life took shape again. A safe apartment, a steady job, a caring support system, a voice she was learning to reclaim. The storm that had nearly taken her life became the beginning of something else, something quieter, steadier, rooted in safety she had almost forgotten was possible. Winter gave way slowly to a pale New England spring, the kind where sunlight felt like something earned. By then, the divorce had already been filed, negotiated, and finalized. Clean, uncontested, almost startlingly simple. Andrew didn't fight. He couldn't. The fallout from the dinner had reached every corner of his professional circle. Harold and Miles kept their distance and shared cautious warnings with other partners. Rumors spread faster than Andrew could chase them down, and every attempt he made to explain the situation only tangled him deeper in his own contradictions. A man who abandoned his wife on Route 6 in a storm had no credibility left to stand on. So when the papers arrived, Andrew signed. Quietly, quickly, without lawyers dragging out the inevitable. He didn't reach out to Laura, not for reconciliation, not for closure. Pride and humiliation kept him silent, and she didn't seek him either. She wanted freedom, not answers. The court date lasted less than 15 minutes. When the judge said, "The marriage is dissolved," Laura felt a weight slide off her shoulders so suddenly she almost swayed. She walked out of the courthouse and let the cold wind wash over her. For the first time in years, her breath didn't catch. It flowed freely. With Victor's help, but her own determination, Laura moved into a small apartment in Cambridge. A brick building with ivy climbing up the side and a tiny third-floor unit that overlooked a quiet, tree-lined street. It wasn't luxurious, it wasn't large, but it was hers. She bought her first set of dishes, her first plants, Her first bedding that Andrew had no say in. She set her own routines: morning coffee at the window, walks along the Charles, quiet evenings with soft lamps, and a stack of borrowed books. She worked full-time at Harrington Construction Group, gradually taking on more responsibility. Organizing contracts turned into managing schedules. Answering phones turned into coordinating meetings. Her confidence grew quietly, steadily, like roots forming in soil that finally felt safe. She saved money. She made plans. She learned how to exist without feeling like she was apologizing for taking up space. And Victor, true to his word, never overstepped. He checked in occasionally, always with respect, always with gentleness, a call every week or two, a quick lunch near Copley Square, an invitation to Sunday dinners at his home, where Sophie greeted her with bright smiles and warm hugs. Their bond was real, but never intrusive. Victor never treated her like someone broken. He treated her like someone brave, someone who survived, someone who deserved better than the storm she had walked through. One quiet evening, months after the night that changed everything, Laura sat at her new desk, a simple pine table by the window, and pulled out a sheet of stationery. She'd been thinking about writing this letter for weeks. Tonight, she finally felt steady enough. She began, "Victor, there are moments in life that divide everything into before and after. Route 6 was mine. I thought that night would be the end of my story. You helped me see it could be the beginning instead. Thank you for stopping. Thank you for believing me. Thank you for helping me when you had every reason to drive past a stranger in the rain. I hope I can repay your kindness someday. But for now, please know that you changed my life, not by saving me, but by seeing me. With gratitude, Laura." She sealed the envelope before her eyes could blur again. She would drop it off tomorrow. Victor didn't need flowery speeches. He understood quiet truth better than anyone she'd ever met. Later that night, Laura stepped onto her small balcony. The air was crisp, the kind of spring chill that hinted at summer but hadn't fully let go of winter. Boston's lights glimmered below, golden reflections on the Charles. The hum of a city alive and moving, a city that now held a chapter of her story she never expected. She wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself and exhaled, a long, steady, unbroken breath. The wind brushed her face softly. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded. A couple laughed as they walked down the sidewalk below. Life continued, unburdened, unafraid. Laura stood there for a long moment, letting the lights of the city settle into her chest. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for the next outburst, the next criticism, the next storm. She wasn't walking on eggshells. She wasn't shrinking to survive. She was safe. She was free. She was herself again. And the night that once took everything from her had become the night that gave her a new beginning.